a person that I've seen a lot at different meetings of garden people and so forth. Seattle is fortunate to have the Arboretum that we have. When John and I travel, we usually try to go to the Arboretums in most cities that we visit. Some of them are so large that you have to be pulled around in some little train, and sometimes I wish we had a little train here, because this is a very large garden, large garden. But we're lucky to have tonight Ray Larson, who is the Associate Director and Curator of the Living Collections and the Otis Hyde Herbarium at the University of Washington Botanical Gardens. John and I have seen and heard Ray perform many times, as we're both members of the Northwest Horticultural Society, which he was the president for several years. And he told me he's still the vice president, but he is now in his term limit, so he'll no longer be there. He'll be around though. So Ray, we're very happy to have you here tonight. By the way, this is sponsored by both Spotlight on Seattle and the Garden Committee, so we're happy to have you here.
Thank you for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to be talking to people in person and to see so many people. It's just a good-sized crowd. So, and I've never been on 3 screens before, so try not to let it overwhelm me. I want to say hi to Bill and Carol Roach. I went to high school with their son Max, so they've known me a long time, back when I was thin and athletic and not into plants as much. But tonight, it'll be a talk primarily about the Arboretum, but we'll talk about the whole program. And I entitled it the Arboretum's First Century because before too long, it will be the first century. We're about 90 some odd years that it's been a public garden, and we're looking forward to a few things we'll talk about at the end that'll get us hopefully just in a few years to that first century. Just a little background, a look back and a look at the more recent years and then to the future. But the University of Washington Botanic Gardens has 2 sites. It combines the gardens, which are primarily at the Washington Park Arboretum, with the programs at the Center for Urban Horticulture, which was founded in 1980 to kind of bring more of an academic and research background to some of the things that we were trying to do at the Arboretum, but due to space constraints couldn't do there. We're part of an academic unit, now the College of the Environment. Underneath that's the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences, formerly the College of Forestry. And together, both sites, 320 acres, so it is pretty big. The Arboretum's 230 acres of that. Just to kind of orient on a map here, so Union Bay is in between. That's Husky Stadium's about halfway between the 2 sites. If you walk between the 2, which most people don't, it's about 2 miles. But as the crow flies, it's closer to 1 mile. We've often dreamed of having a little boat connection between the 2 sites just to avoid the Mont Lake traffic and the bridge. But that seems to be a ways off. So on the south side, we've got the Arboretum, very long and narrow, about over almost 1 mile in length, and then at the north there you can see the Center for Urban Horticulture, which is on the east part of the campus. So that was created in the 1970s basically to house a lot of the things that a modern arboretum needed. We're fortunate that we have an excellent library there, the herbarium, which we'll talk about, the greenhouses and growing spaces, and then classrooms and laboratories and some administration functions. The Miller Library is the largest horticultural library in the Northwest. It's one of the best in North America. It's free and open to the public. Anybody can check out books there. And we've got 16 acres of display gardens, and then the big natural area, the former Mont Lake Fill. And we're on main campus, so it feels far enough away across the parking lots and the natural area to feel kind of separate. At the center, the smaller of the 2 sites, we've got the library and the herbarium, the demonstration gardens, and just kind of outlines kind of where everything is in relation to each other. We've got this campus of buildings, and then right next to that is the former Montlake Fill, which since the early 90s has been used as a restoration and ecological research site. Just a picture of the Miller Library. It's a great place to, I'm probably the most frequent user. Not everything's online yet. And we've got a great collection of magazines from all over the world, periodicals, books, and it's a wonderful resource. Open 6 days a week. And just an example of kind of the things that go on there. Lots of books, as you would imagine, but also exhibit space and some study space and a program room. The herbarium is the other part of my job. So that's basically a permanent repository of pressed plants. And so we have about 24,000 specimens there. It's still very useful, even though DNA and modern understanding of genetics has made things a little different in how you classify things. But it's a permanent physical record of not only the Arboretum's collections, but those of other local gardens, and also used for research. And the Northwest weed collection is there too, so we get a lot of researchers studying invasive plants that come in. And best of all, if you have a plant you don't know, we'll do some free plant ID for you, which is always a fun one. Just an example of some of the gardens there. We have several display gardens. The Garden Club, Seattle Garden Club sponsors a fragrance garden, which is nice year-round, but especially in the spring and summer. The Medina Courtyard has this wonderful collection of maples and textural plants. The Soest Perennial Garden is about 20 years old now, but it has 7 different beds of different soil, water, light requirements, so you can see what plants do well in those conditions. And on a sunny day, you can see Mount Rainier over the greenhouses there. It's not too smoky. And then a small native plant display garden, kind of native plants suitable for more urban landscapes. And so I took this picture just a week and a half ago. Those are the serviceberries in bloom, Amelanchier, and very brief, but I'd say rivals this grove of about 40 trees is a pretty spectacular display once it's really going. And then later in the year, as the berries form, the birds like to fight over the berries and they get drunk off the fruits, and it's just a magical way to not just enjoy plants, but enjoy some of the birds, and the natural area adjacent to it is one of the best urban bird watching areas in Western Washington. And that's 74 acres, 4 miles of shoreline, and before the lake was lowered in 1916 was the deepest peat bog in the state. And then it was used as a garbage landfill site for 60 years, and then more recently capped and turned over to ecological restoration research and very passive enjoyment of wildlife. One of the newer parts of the natural areas, the Yesler Swamp. This was developed about 10 years ago by Professor Kern Ewing in conjunction with the neighborhood. And this was an area that used to be the outlet of Yesler Creek, which is mostly in culverts in northeast Seattle. In the war, it was a victory garden, and then since then it had been kind of left to its own devices, and now there's this lovely quarter-mile boardwalk that takes you right out to the water, and a great place to watch birds and some other fun things, especially in the spring. And you can see across the bay to 520 in the Arboretum. So the Arboretum itself is about where 95% of the plants are. That's been around the longest. Founded in 1934. It's a joint partnership with the City of Seattle and the University of Washington, with major funding from the Arboretum Foundation. It's got one of the largest temperate plant collections in the United States, the biggest in the Northwest, and about 40,000 plants with about 5,000 different kinds of plants, and it's one of the biggest tree collections in North America. So we're managed by the university, the city, with major support by the foundation, and we each have our own roles. It's a little challenging at times, having 3 different organizations make decisions, but for the most part, it's worked very well. Going back in time, this picture is from 1909. This is from a blimp that was taking pictures of the Alaska Yukon Pacific exhibition, so mostly directed toward campus and the fair going on then, but fortunately for us, the folks in the balloon took a picture behind them as well. So what we see here is Foster Island, which at the time, before the lake was lowered, was actually 2 islands, and before 520, before the Montlake cut. And so just to the right of the picture is where the Arboretum is, and this is another early picture of the shoreline. So by the time it became a public park in 1900, it had been logged twice by the Puget Mill Company, mostly in the 1880s. And back then, they only took the biggest trees. They didn't clear cut. So a lot of remnant vegetation or less desirable trees were left behind. So before it became an arboretum, it was a city park, and at the time in 1900, it was pretty far away from where most people in the city lived. This is a picture of 1922 of a harness racing, which was using the old skid road, which later became Azalea Way. So there were horse barns and riding stables and bike paths and very passive uses except for this. In 1911, that's the Wilcox Bridge there. That was built in 1911. This picture is from 1931, so right before it became an arboretum. The road, Lake Washington Boulevard, through the park was laid out by the Olmsted brothers in 1903, so that the road was there earlier, and that viaduct, which has a clearance of about 9 feet 9 inches according to the sign, and still gets hit by box trucks and vehicles about once a week, is there to stay because there's a 66-inch water main running through the middle of that. The deal was the Puget Mill Company, which owned the land, wanted to develop residential properties east of the site, now Broadmoor, the golf course and private community there. So they gave 60 acres of land to the city in exchange for water and sewer connections. It's right next to Arboretum Creek to the left there, so you can't lower the road because it would flood, and you can't raise the bridge. So it's still kind of a challenge. A few years ago, we were doing a big planting just north of the bridge, and there was an ice cream truck that was, I think, delivering to Broadmoor, but they hit it. It was a refrigerated truck and just ice cream all over the place. So the bridge always wins. So that took a while to clean up. So in the original campus for the University of Washington moved to its current site in 1895, and they got a lot of land. They moved from the downtown 10-acre campus that had been there since 1861, but they got a lot of land set aside for the new campus because it was proposed in the legislature as a campus and arboretum. So much of the campus in the early days was an arboretum, and it wasn't until the campus really started developing after the Yukon Pacific exhibition in 1909. By the 20s, the land was getting a little tighter and more valuable for buildings, and the last straw was the campus golf course was there where the medical center is now. It was kind of like, well, we're running out of room. Which will win, the golf course or the arboretum? The golf course was a little more popular at the time, so President Suzzalo in the 20s started looking for another site for the Arboretum, and nearby was Washington Park. So the city signed an agreement with the university in 1925, but not much happened for the first 9 years. And then in 1934, they signed a new agreement to kind of kickstart things. The Depression was well underway then, and the Seattle Garden Club funded the Olmsted Brothers firm to design a plan for an arboretum on the site. And so here you can see the original plan from 1936. Much of the middle was developed as envisioned. Some other parts out here, there's lagoons and this roadway, kind of where 520 is now. It wasn't, but it was a plan, and there was a great need for a site in an urban area to put people to work during the Depression, so we got a lot of Works Progress Administration funds, and a lot of the early roads and pathways and irrigation were all installed during the Depression. So that was a great kickstart for the Arboretum. This is the stone cottage, and that still stands. This was built in 37, 38. The walls there are built of Enumclaw basalt, 13 inches thick, kind of designed to be a gatehouse at the south end of the Arboretum. There was planned to be another one at the north end, and the Arboretum itself was modeled after the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard in Boston, and that also had a city-university partnership. But at the time, it was envisioned that the whole thing would be gated. And that met opposition right away. And Lake Washington Boulevard, which at the time was very much a park road, you know, windy and curvy and slow, started getting a lot more traffic by then anyway. But there's still some of these nice features right now. Many gardeners have lived there over the years. Right now we're repurposing it into much needed office space, but I hope to have it open to the public a little bit more in the future. This is the early greenhouse. Part of that still stands. This is looking north across the cut to what is now the Center for Urban Horticulture and kind of Wedgwood Bryant. We're kind of in the background there. The row of trees in the foreground still exists. They're about 80 feet tall now, but still in a tight row. And the maintenance barn in the background there is still used today by maintenance crews, somewhat remodeled. This is a picture from 1938. This is the row of trees that you saw that were used kind of to screen the giant nursery they had with thousands and thousands of plants. The early days, the mission of the Arboretum was to grow every plant that you could grow in this climate, which turns out to be a lot. So they really invested heavily, and this is probably 20 acres of nursery space here. So those trees, like I say, still are there, but here you can kind of see the general character of the landscape. You still have quite a few the native remnant trees from logging, and then some of the early collections. And Broadmoor there, just right next door. So this is the Arboretum in 1952. This is before 520 was built, so the north end was pretty extensive. It went all the way down to Motley Boulevard, with the Museum of History and Industry being built about 10 years before this in its original site, actually just a few years before this. And the cherry trees from the quad originally were in this section of the Arboretum here. They were moved when Highway 520 was built. So those all came from the Arboretum. But this kind of shows kind of the early prime of the collection. And this is a picture from May of 1952. So you can see the nursery, the trees along there are filled in. There's a lot of nice spike flowering trees there. Those are all our native dogwoods, Cornus natalii. Sadly, a pathogen arrived in the 70s that's killed most of those. There's very few left. You see some in ideal sites throughout parts of town, but they're very susceptible to a disease called anthracnose. But here you can see some of the newer gardens, some of the plantings, and of course Azalea Way, which was the iconic feature of the Olmsted plan, a 3/4 mile walk lined with azaleas, cherries, dogwoods, magnolias, which still is a major feature today. Here's just another look at all the crazy amount of plants that they were growing back then, and there was a lot of room to plant. They spent a lot of time planting, and all those plants eventually got pretty big. So it's a very full arboretum. It's an aging and somewhat crowded collection in some areas. But so here's Azalea Way. This is I believe in the late 1940s here. So you can see it's kind of taken shape. That's the old skid road for the logging that went all the way to Union Bay originally, and then converted under the Olmsted plan. And this is it just a couple weeks ago. Very similar in character. The only big change is it used to be grass the whole way down, and for many decades of trying to improve the grass so it would drain and not get muddy during our wetter period of the year, they finally gave up in the early 2010s and put gravel in the middle, and that's made all the difference. It's now easy to enjoy year-round, but still lined with cherries. Many of the same evergreens are there. And Mother's Day is always our busiest day of the year, but just an example of what you'll see this time of year. Has some nice fall color too, and some later flowering magnolias, but spring and mid-spring is very much the peak. If you've flown in to Seattle and had a chance to fly, looking out your window on a sunny day, if you're anywhere near the Arboretum, you'll see our golden oak, Orchis robur concordia. It's easy to pick out from, we're right under the flight path flying in. So next time if you're flying into town, take a look out. See something bright yellow, that's what you're looking at there. This is the Woodland Garden, which was originally developed in 1938, and a few years ago, and then wonderful fall color, one of the best spots in our region for a good fall color display, and the country's largest public collection of Japanese maples, nearly 300 kinds. So the Arboretum today, this is our current map here. We've got a big chunk of the Arboretum still being, what we've learned is now going to come back to us, but it's currently a construction park for 520 rebuilt there at the north end, but some of the many gardens that have developed over time. And you can see how much things have filled in. This is an aerial view. So Azalea Way being the feature that runs at the north from the visitor center all the way down to the Japanese garden and all the different collection areas. We'll talk about a few of these. This is from a couple years ago when the New Zealand forest was pretty new. And we have, of course, plant collections are much of what we're all about. We have quite a few and several of particular importance. Our longest serving and earliest major director, Brian Mulligan, was there for 25 years. Came from England and certainly had his favorites. But again, when you're growing every possible tree that you can grow in this climate, you end up with a lot. And some of our collections are quite well established and recognized. So we have three types. We've got the taxonomic ones that are arranged by plant family and relationships to each other. The somewhat inelegantly named functional landscape collection, the aesthetic ones, so things like the woodland garden or things that are grouped by display purposes. And then our third type, ecogeographic, which is a newer type we've been working with a lot in the last 15 years. So, taxonomically, lots of them. We have several national collections, maples, oaks, magnolias, holly, and of course in the Northwest you'd expect conifers to be a major feature, but things such as mountain ashes, rhododendrons, of course, quite a few different things. And the Olmsteds arranged the Arboretum plan in a taxonomic system. So at the time it was done, it was the last major Arboretum designed in that way, in the sequence in which plants were thought to have evolved. So conifers were together, and then you went with the next most primitive thing, magnolias, ginkgos, things like that, and went around. But as it turns out, that may look good on paper, but not all plants that are part of the same family or the same genus necessarily like the same growing conditions. So some areas of the Arboretum are very wet and clay soils, and so your red-twig dogwood may not enjoy the same conditions as your native dogwood or flowering tree. So Brian Mulligan kind of kept some of that where it was suitable and then changed it. And of course, we understand plant evolution much differently now than we did back then. But we have several outstanding collections. This is the Dan Hinckley Asian Maple Collection. So we have the center of the center of maple diversity is Southeast Asia. So focusing primarily on plants from China, Indochina, Japan. Other areas that focus on families, so this is the Ericaceous collection, the heather or rhododendron family, lots of ornamental members of that. And then of course magnolias, which everybody loves, especially right now. This is at the right, this is an Arboretum introduction, Wada's Memory, which is still one of the best white flowering forms that was selected from seed sent from Japan in 1940. And then this magnolia in the upper left is Magnolia sargentiana. Those blooms are about a foot to 14 inches wide. Brief, but spectacular. So, pretty exciting. So just an example of some of the taxonomic collections we have. And then the functional landscape or the aesthetic collection. So things grouped together by either display value or what they like. So Azalea Way being a primary example of that. Woodland garden, plants that like woodland conditions. And you can see kind of the years in which those developed. So that's the second major type. So this is the winter garden, even in summer, one of my favorite spaces. It's just very well designed, arranged in a forest opening, kind of a garden room. This is Stewardia with the Monodelpha with the kind of cinnamon colored bark, and then Persian violets and other woodland lovers below it. And then we just passed witch hazel season, but those are some of my favorites for color and fragrance in the middle of winter. The woodland garden. Can't get enough of, growing up here, I grew up in Seattle, and there's not a lot of great fall color in our woods. There's, vine maples are excellent, and some huckleberries and things like that. But, big leaf maples are okay. But it wasn't until I kind of got into some of the variety of woodland plants that you really came to appreciate how good fall color can be. So. And then we have recently shifted, we have a lot of color in spring and fall, but not as much in the summer, so we've recently installed more summer collections too. And of course the Japanese garden. Also outstanding place to do fall color. So Kubota, woodland garden, Japanese garden, wonderful places. And then of course the lovely pond. And then Ecogeographic is our newest type of collection. And these are plants basically from the ground planes to the treetop from a particular place in the world. So kind of an immersive experience. And we've chosen these based on climates that are similar to ours. So the first one was the New Zealand High Country exhibit. Higher elevations of the South Island, a lot of those plants grow very well here. And then the Pacific Connections Garden took what was envisioned in our most recent master plan of 2001 and focuses on 5 areas around the Pacific Rim that have climate conditions similar to ours. So we'll look at a few of those. Basically, we focused on areas in the Pacific Rim that have the same latitude as us, roughly. So same sunlight during the year, roughly same temperatures, similar rainfall. And this is our meadow that was installed in 2008. This kind of offers a preview for each of those areas. And we have entry gardens for each one. So Australia, New Zealand, China, which is an embarrassment of riches for gardens. Chile, which has a climate almost exactly the same as ours, except reversed, of course, summer being winter there. And Cascadia, which for us is the Northwest, but primary focus of the forest is plants in the Siskiyou region, which is the center of plant diversity on the West Coast because it combines the Northwest flora with that of California where they mix. And so a few of these forests we've built out to their full extent. Eventually this will be a 14-acre display at the south end of the Arboretum, which historically had been less developed than other parts of the Arboretum. There had been the holly collection there and a rockery and not much else. So this is the Cascadia Forest, and for this one we're on collecting trips to southern Oregon, northern California, bring back seed, grow them, and eventually we'll have a forest. And this is kind of, from plan to conception. This is about, I guess, 12 years old now. So now things are starting to fill in. Some of the trees are starting to take on more of a forest-like effect. Another early garden was the gateway to Chile, which is on the hillside across from the Washington Park playfield. And so here we got some of the diversity. The problem with this site is when the Olmsteds designed Lake Washington Boulevard through the Arboretum, they followed the contours of land everywhere except for this portion. And they sliced off a bluff to create the road, and mostly it follows what was Arboretum Creek's route through there. But it's been very hard to grow plants on this very clay soil. And they made a big effort to plant a lot of monkey puzzles here when they installed the garden. And monkey puzzles tolerate wet well, but they don't tolerate bad drainage. So we've only got a few left. But other plants are doing well, so we adapt. One thing that has done surprisingly well is the Chilean wine palm. This palm tree, typically around town we'll see windmill palms from China, that's about it. This has the largest diameter trunk of any palm species, but it's very slow growing. So the first 3 or 4 years we protected these in the winter with little covers and boxes to see if they could get established and get through the winter, and they've actually done very well. They made it through last winter just fine, and they're starting to put on some height, and they give kind of this tropical look, which is kind of fun. And then the New Zealand forest was the first big forest we developed. We've long had a partnership with the Seattle Christchurch Sister City Society, and so we've worked closely with New Zealand gardeners in developing this. This was installed in 2013, and the idea here is you have a part of the South Island that has, cold temperatures about the same. Rainfall's similar, not exactly, but pretty close, and 7 different sub-environments within that. So this is right after planting, and then after about 7 years it started to fill in. So there'll be mostly a broadleaf forest and then quite a bit of open areas. And these are plants that until recently, and a lot of them still till now, haven't been grown very widely here. So we're kind of trialing new things and getting them out there and seeing what works. And for the most part, we had a little trouble last winter with some things. A little cold, or 2 winters ago I should say, but most things have done pretty well. And then just wanted to talk about some more recent projects the last few years. The biggest one, when I started, we really were in final planning for the Arboretum Loop Trail, which is 1.2 miles of new trail, mostly along existing trails that were either gravel or grass, but that kind of connected with the existing Arboretum Drive, which was closed through traffic in 2011 to create a 2-mile loop around the Arboretum. So the new trail goes through a lot of the Arboretum that was inaccessible 9 months of the year because it went through a lot of kind of swampy, wet, out of the way areas. So since it opened in 2018, it's really driven a lot of extra visitorship to parts of the Arboretum that were previously not visited, and it actually made the park feel a lot bigger getting to these areas. So using that opportunity, we've taken where the trail goes through the south part of the Arboretum. We're developing this larger Pacific Connections Garden concept, and where the trail went through, we started replanting the species native to those areas, so offering little previews. So some sections, about a quarter of a mile, have a introduction to Shan, which is the mountain in China that we're referencing for our China collection. And that one mountain has 3,000 species on it. And to give you an example, the entire Pacific Northwest has 2,700 species. So there's more species on one mountain in the center of plant diversity than we have. So it's really an amazing amount of plants to choose from that have high ornamental value. So rhododendrons, scheffleras, a variety of things. And so we started to plant that back, see some growth. I wish I had a picture of something in flower. This is from last year, I apologize. But things are filling in. And then the same part for sections along Chile. So we're having a chance to add a lot of new things to kind of preview what will eventually happen. So at appropriate sites, we're planting monkey puzzles. You see a lot of big ones around town. They were popular, 70, 80 years ago, so you see some big ones, but the idea is to eventually create a forest, like you would see here in Chile. And then the trail and other projects has given us an opportunity to do enhancements to some of our major collections. We have the National Collection together with several other partner gardens of oaks. And so we've been taking this opportunity to add new species, plants of wild origin, collect acorns or do exchanges with other gardens, and really kind of want to make sure we're always planting. So we have things that are always in different stages of their life. We have an older collection, it was heavily planted, but we're planning for the future and planning for changes in climate and weather and always trialing new things. Viburnums, we have a very large collection. These are, kind of, people love or hate, but there's a lot of diversity in the genus, so we've been adding that with a lot of new species that we haven't had before, and so planting along the trail. This is a favorite. It's not the greatest picture, unfortunately. It's an evergreen one from China. This was collected in Sichuan province, where Shan is, in 2004 by, at the time, undergraduate Liz Reyes, who now works at Heronswood. And this is one of my favorites because it's got these great leaves in the upper right there, evergreen. Flowers in late June, early July with honey-scented flowers, and then followed by red berries, and then new growth in the spring is often bronzy red. So it's one that's not available. It should be much more widely grown. And then we just completed a project in Rhododendron Glen. We've been planting this for several years. The Glen is one of the oldest garden collections and in the Arboretum. The rockery dates here from the mid to late 30s. But it really become kind of shaded out and overgrown. A lot of the plants had died or didn't flower any longer. So we really did a good rejuvenation there and then some new construction. So we just added, here's the lower pond at Azalea Way there. We added a new seating area that has the view to the pond. This was all lawn previously, so we still retain some of that, but to the right is Arboretum Creek, which we've enhanced with some improvements to make it more ecologically friendly, and then we added some new planting beds. So this is a couple months ago, just still planting some, but on your next visit, or the next time I come talk, or virtually, you'll see a lot of new things there, because in the Arboretum, sun is at a premium. And a lot of rhododendron species, there's 1,000 different species in the wild. So I grew up here, I had kind of a love-hate relationship with rhododendrons. A lot of them get big and they're kind of garish colors, but when I worked at the Miller Garden during graduate school, I kind of was introduced to species rhododendrons that have different leaves and different textures and maybe more subtle flowers or different, anyway. So there's a lot to choose from, and so we've really been fortunate that the rhododendron species Botanic Garden in Federal Way, which is the largest collection of wild rhododendrons in the country, or in the world almost, them in Edinburgh, they are very excited to share plants with us because they want to get their material to other places to have redundancy in their conservation collections. And also, since we keep records with our very extensive database, we keep track of things very well. So they've been giving us a lot of free plants, which has been great. So we've had a lot of plants in the ericaceous persuasion, the rhododendrons, kalmias, huckleberries, goltherias, and then a lot of flowering trees. So going back, coming into bloom in the next couple of weeks, and then in the summer we planted several disease-resistant flowering dogwoods, some new species from China that we're trialing with other genera, and then some very large leaf late summer blooming rhododendron, or magnolias. So Magnolia ashii is one that we received seedlings from wild collections in the Florida Panhandle. We've been growing one version of this in the main Arboretum Magnolia collection since 1961, and it's been perfectly hardy. So this is a shrubbier version of the big leaf Magnolia macrophylla that can get leaves up to 2 feet long. And so they're very tropical looking, and that will bloom for us in July. So, you know, hopefully it's hardy in the winter. They've had a couple at the Spheres at Amazon that have been growing outside for a few years. So anyway, so we're excited about that, several other things. And then the future. So things we're working on now. The next phase of Pacific Connections Garden, we really would like to improve the circulation at the south end of Azalea Way up to the new gardens up the hill. It's kind of a steep lawn and not a very good connection right now, so we're looking at developing some accessible pathways and then doing collection development along there. I do wish relations with China were a little better now. It'd be easier to maybe take some trips to get some of these plants and get some funding, but anyway, it's a very, very botanically rich area. So we just started some initial planning for that. And then the Woodland Meadow project, this is the former nursery that you saw in the early photos. And right now, this is one of the largest lawn areas in the Arboretum. Broadmoor's right next to it. It's right across from the Woodland Garden. And it's envisioned as a more usable community gathering space. Right now, the lawn is great in the dry months, but 8, 9 months of the year, it's kind of soggy, and we use it a lot for our education classes and field trips and summer camp. But we'd also like to be able to host community events there and volunteer celebrations and things. So we've just started work with a firm to kind of improve the drainage, daylight more of the creek that runs from the property to the east there, and have a place that's more usable year-round. And one of the few sunny areas that we can enjoy our wonderful summers and have some plantings that are a little more summer appropriate. And then the big one, the Arboretum North Entry. So this is the Washington State Department of Transportation's big laydown area for the Highway 520 project here at the north end of the Arboretum. So north, is just off the screen, is Husky Stadium there. This is all the lay down and areas that 520 occupies. Before 520 was built in the early 60s, this was the center of our rose collection. So this is that same area. It was planted in the 40s. It was another former landfill, the old Miller Street dump. But quite a bit of land. And then, of course, 520 came along. This is a picture from 1963. So where all the on-ramps are was where the rose collection was. And then today, a little different, north on this one is to the left. So when WashDOT is done with this land, they're going to return about 27 acres to the city of Seattle that will be incorporated into the Arboretum. And so we have an opportunity there. It's largely treeless, a lot of wetlands. We have Arboretum Creek, so we have an opportunity to daylight more of the creek, have a connection directly to the lake instead of through a sewer pipe, and then do some nice interpretation with new collections. We're looking at doing kind of a lot of native plantings, Gary Oak Savanna in some of the higher areas, and some additional trails that connect more closely to the campus and the existing loop trail. So we're hoping that's supposed to be turned over to us. We just signed an agreement for that transfer and some mitigation dollars. So that will come back to us in 2030, just in time for our 100th anniversary in 2034. So we're doing a lot of planning now and thinking about what we can do ahead of time and what that property might look like. So whether you visit remotely or in person, we have several resources I wanted to share with you. This is our one of our interactive maps. So you can load that up on your computer or desktop, laptop, phone, and zoom into any part of the Arboretum, click on one of those green dots and find out what it is, where it's from, flash reported condition, our accession number, all that good information. We have mobile optimized versions too, but this is the one I use the most often. We have, of course, maps on our website that are of the kind that you saw earlier, the trail maps, and various seasonal walking tours you can take. And then we have a lot of public education programs. The pandemic has been great for reaching a lot more people through online classes and Zoom programs, so you can hear people like me talk, or you can do more interactive things there. We also have quite a suite of professional classes and for all ages and skill levels, and then an extensive youth and family program. We've had an outdoor preschool in the Arboretum for the last 10 years. We currently have 3 classrooms that use that, rain or shine, during the school year. And right now, we're back to hosting field trips every week. So we serve about 7,000 kids in the greater Seattle area annually there. And then we have several resources. So even if you can't visit the library, there's great resources linked through that. Book lists, doing some ebooks now. We have our newsletter that comes out monthly, and it's a great way to kind of experience everything we have to offer from wherever you want. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and we'll be happy to.
We have questions. We have mics coming around.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We'll make sure we get to everybody. Hello.
Hi. Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I moved here from New Hampshire, and moving plants from New Hampshire to Washington was more trouble than it was work. So how do you manage to get all this plant material across borders and country borders, etc.?
It is a lot harder to move plants across boundaries and borders than it used to be. So pretty much internationally, we receive just about everything from seed, where it goes through inspections, make sure it's free of pests and pathogens. And also we run it through our decision tree on potentially invasive plants too. But we do get a lot of things by seed, and then locally in this country, in Canada, we can share cuttings and plants. For bigger plants, we still move around some bigger things. Our manager of horticulture, David Zuckerman, who is unfortunately retiring in June after 40 years at the Arboretum, but he finally got his wish to get a tree spade to dig bigger plants a couple of years ago, so now we can dig and move bigger things. Typically, yeah, we'll grow things on from cuttings or seeds, and then hopefully we'll get them big enough to go out in the Arboretum where they can survive the occasional foot traffic or bunny attack, and thrive. You know, we have an initial plant care program where they get extra care for the first 3 years until we get a little more established. But our biggest challenge, honestly, has been rabbits the last 6 years. Growing up here, we never had rabbits other than occasional pet escapes. But right after the New Zealand garden was established, a couple years after, maybe 2016 or so, we started seeing rabbits. And every year, they've gotten to be more of them, and unfortunately, they sample everything. So when you're in the Arboretum, you will see a lot of our new plantings have little wire cages around them, and that's to keep the nibbling at bay until hopefully they're a little bigger. We've found that they even like things that are supposed to be poisonous. So they'll nibble rhododendrons, and unfortunately their teeth grow throughout their lifetime, so they've started sampling some of the trees. So other than that, we do, but it is always a challenge to move plants, especially long distances.
We have one over here as well.
This is a kind of a tangential question. I grew up in Palo Alto. In our backyard, we had a eucalyptus tree. Can I assume it was probably transplanted from either New Zealand or Australia?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I know California's long had a lot of eucalyptus that were introduced, some for honey production, some for timber. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of them are somewhat flammable. But it's interesting in the Arboretum, since we have records going back pretty detailed till 1936, we've tried a lot of eucalyptus over the years. We used to keep things on index cards, and we have a whole section of our morgue, we call it, of plants that have died. So we have this whole cabinet full of index cards, and there's several dozen eucalyptus species there. We've been more successful recently. There's one of our tallest broadleaf trees in the Arboretum is a eucalyptus gunnii. It's from the late 60s. But with the New Zealand, or the Australia forest, we've been experimenting with some higher elevation ones, and if they can get through the first few years, they do okay. But yes, definitely all of those would have been brought over from Australia. They grow fast, so yes.
Do we have a working relationship with the Chinese garden at South Seattle College campus?
Yeah, there is a relationship, but it's not super close. We have exchanged some plants in the past. You know, theirs is very much a classical setup, so I know some of the peonies, they've been growing a lot of those recently and some of that, but it's one that could be closer. We have more of a relationship with the community college, the South Seattle's based there too, and we work with them on internships and that kind of thing. But yeah, it kind of has ebbed and flowed kind of as people have needed things or asked for things or had extras of things. So.
Hello, over here on your left.
Oh, way left, okay, yep.
Yeah, thank you. I saw the picture of the rocky water course that zigzags through the New Zealand garden.
Yes.
At the time that was put in, I understood that it was going to carry excess water down the hillside, and I was expecting a raging torrent for 3 or 4 months a year. I've never seen a drop of water.
Yeah.
Could you tell me what happened?
Sure, yeah. That's in New Zealand, that hillside is got a lot of seeps in it. There's a kind of a perched water table at the golf course next door. They've actually got a couple of ponds right on the fence line that fill with water. And so that was an attempt by the landscape architects to kind of capture some of that water. When we were building the trail, the loop trail, we had probably the wettest winter we've had in quite some time. And that's the only time I've seen it full of water. On occasions, you'll get some in the lower parts of it where there is a trickle, but yeah, it was kind of a way to try to address some of the drainage in that hillside, and it works, but not as well as I think was envisioned. It looks nice, and the nice thing about it is that part of New Zealand, the higher elevations are often rocky and have similar looking landscapes. So like if you go to, and unfortunately I have not yet gone, I've seen lots of pictures and talked to people, the rockeries actually blend in pretty nicely with what a lot of that landscape looks like. So if you've watched the Lord of the Rings movies, that's all filmed in New Zealand. So occasionally in there I'm like, okay, that's what we're going for with that. But yeah, it's a little more aesthetic than functional at this point. Since then, they put it in, there's been other seeps that have popped up, and I'm like, gosh, I wish the rockery was over here capturing that. But
One back here.
nope.
So my question is entirely different. As a non-horticultural person, as a non-Northwestern person, how would you suggest someone come and visit the Arboretum? Which I have been to many times, but how should I experience it without being able to appreciate the detail to which you have wonderfully introduced us?
Well, it's a good question because, most of our visitors are enjoying the Arboretum pretty passively. A lot of people, it's just a great open outdoor space that's reasonably well cared for, especially compared to other parks, just because, we have city staff there and university staff, and that's been great. So I think, depending a little bit on the time of year, we do offer the seasonal tour maps now in the Arboretum, but really within, if you go to the visitor center, for instance, in a short walk there, the winter garden's there, and there's still something to see there, even in the summer. Again, it is my probably favorite space in the Arboretum year-round, but Azalea Way and some of these things close by are kind of a good preview. So winter garden, woodland garden, Azalea Way are all within just a 5 to 10 minute walk. And I'd probably start there, but then you can either look on the computer, the same maps are on there, or else just pick up a hard copy when you're there. But there is a lot to see in a lot of different areas. So, and I find that even now I'm still finding areas that I are not new, but feel like I have a lot to discover yet. So, yeah.
Guided walks also.
Oh yeah, we do have guided walks. We're fairly diminished during the pandemic, but we're offering those again, I think for first Thursdays and some weekends.
Have you had much left?
Oh, question is if we've had much of that. It's ebbed and flowed, not as much lately. Historically, we had quite a bit at times with some new plantings. When Arboretum Drive closed the traffic, I think that dropped a bit. And now that folks have smartphones and access to some resources, I think that maybe there's people are finding other ways. But yeah, it's a good question. We have had certainly bouts of it in the past and some vandalism, though. It's lately it's been more of, it's still a popular spot for high school parties, Friday evenings, some trampling goes on in some of these places, but plant theft has been not as much as in the past. So that's encouraging.
Raymond? Get back over here, Raymond.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
oh, sorry, one more yet. I know you've been waiting, so.
Over the past 10 years, I had to start making changes in my own gardening because of climate change. So I'm wondering what the Arboretum has had to change recently and looking forward in the future because of climate change, how that's affected your watering needs and all that.
Yeah, that's the climate change is one of the big tasks we're facing, and not just here, but around the gardening world. Recent national conferences have really shifted to focusing that. So what we do, unfortunately, there's some species that have been more affected by others early on. So if you notice around town, a lot of birch trees have done very poorly in the last 5 or 6 years. That's due to an insect that's native to North America, but really found a foothold after a series of hotter than drier summers starting in about 2014, 2015. And so that's really decimated our collections with that. The other noticeable one we had is our native western hemlocks have died much more disproportionately to other conifers, and it turns out they're quite water sensitive compared to other ones. Both of those trees you used to be able to plant and kind of forget about. They grow, especially birches in most places. So these things at the margins, if they don't have perfect conditions, right soil, right watering when they want it, they're starting to show up as things that are really suffering. So we're trying to expand the plant palette we're doing. We're trying to optimize the care we give to some of these species that are teetering a bit, either through extra mulching, maybe some extra summer watering, but then also looking at shifting our palette a bit. But it's interesting because we're hotter, but we're still getting cold temperatures too. So in some ways, our climate's gonna, at least in the near term, we can maybe grow less than we could. We can grow some things that prefer warmer temperatures, but then we'll get this occasional winter blast that will knock them out. So it's very much a work in progress. Australia has been kind of at the forefront of this. A lot of their public gardens have really been grappling with this the last 20 years. And so we're kind of learning from other gardens. But basically we're trying things that are, we hope are more drought and climate resilient. One of our research projects has been the Climate Ready Landscape Plants program with 6 other Western universities throughout from Arizona to our region, looking at different selections within species or genera of plants that are better at surviving these conditions, so plant breeders can focus on those for further development. That's been a project the last few years, but yeah, it's a tough one, and we're really at the beginning of figuring out what we're going to do. But definitely trying things from higher elevations, things that are seed. Things grown from seed have the greatest genetic variation in them, so there's a lot of selection that can still be done there, even within our native flora.
Here's the question back here.
When we used to live in Lower Elmhurst, there used to be stories that high school kids would go to the Mont Lake dump and light methane gas. Is that still happening?
No, there's still a few methane towers out in the fill areas and under the parking lots, but none has been emitting enough to light a flame. So yeah, no, it's not. When I was in high school, I remember being out in that area in the early days of when they were trying to convert it and seeing those towers. But even then, it was not happening in that way. But I've heard those stories too. Yeah.
You mentioned in passing something that affects the dogwoods.
Uh-huh.
Could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a fungal disease called anthracnose that really affects our native dogwood, Pacific dogwood, Cornus natalii, and the East Coast dogwood, Cornus florida. And they'll still often bloom, but the fungus will attack the flowers and foliage, and over time can weaken and kill them. And it was especially devastating to our native dogwood. So where you still see some, like in my part of northeast Seattle where I live, there's still some pretty big ones, but they're on really well-drained sites and they have kind of perfect growing conditions. But what we've done recently is the Kuza dogwood, which is a species native to China, Korea, Japan, is resistant to anthracnose and is much less affected by it. And so there's been some breeding in recent decades between natalii, or the native one we have, and that to produce ones that look like the native one, that achieve the same flower size and height that are now resistant. So we're starting to plant more of those. And then we're still looking for selections of the native ones. There's some that are purported to be more resistant, but yeah. So it's I think originally the disease was in Eastern Asia.
Is there a problem with pollen in the arboretum?
Pollen in the arboretum, it fluctuates. It's real interesting because conifers really shed a lot at certain times of the year, and so late winter oftentimes. So it ebbs and flows. I mean, I'm fortunately not real susceptible to it, so I don't notice it as much as some, but I would say, you know, it is pretty open and breezy and ventilated, so it hasn't been anything that I've been aware of causing a problem for visitors above any other apartment.
Over here.
Oh, I just want to give a shout out to, I'm from this area and I've grown up here, and there's really the value of a great park. And I guess I'm listening to you and thinking of it, like, is this like kind of like a representation, like a zoo for plants? And it's kind of like trying to must be kind of difficult to get that balance between these select species to represent that area, but just I hope to keep in mind how many people really value having a great place and a great park.
Yeah, we often refer to ourselves as kind of the zoo of the plant world, because we have one or two of everything we can, and you know, we're finding, I just did an update of our conservation collection. We have about 320 species of high conservation value that are threatened or near extinct in the wild, and so gardens are a great way to kind of keep those things growing. And these aren't always the prettiest things or the things with the biggest flowers, but it is something, and we still get yearly research requests from institutions around North America for samples of things, because we can grow them and other places can't. And, you know, there's still a lot to learn about plants and how they grow, how they evolve, how they can adapt or not to climate changes, and so there's a lot to learn out there, and it's great to be able to share some of that and still have this place that, you know, can be enjoyed by anybody and free and open to the public, and just, you know, a place to be outside. So it is a balancing act, but you know, we recognize that we have a lot of public health benefits and just you know, passive recreation benefits, not just about science stuff, but that's of course near and dear to me and others.
We can love science as well.
Yeah, that's right. We can all work together.
I think we've had a very good learning experience tonight, Ray, and we certainly appreciate you coming here. Maybe we'll see what's happening in the next 5 years. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure, yes. Happy to come back.